Welcome everyone again. It is with the wonders of technology that this next session will be held completely online via Zoom. The title of our session is the International Approach on Building Strategies Towards Countering Hybrid Threats. Our first speaker is Dr. Josef Schroefl, Deputy Director of the Community of Interest on Strategy and Defense from the EU Hybrid Center of Excellence. Dr. Schroefl, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the short intro. I'm happy to be here and I'm also honored for the invitation. Thank you very much. We are speaking, or I will speak about hybrid threats. Of course, I'm from the Hybrid Center of Excellence, about the international approach on building strategies. If we want to speak about that, we must start in 2014 at least, with the annexation of the Crimea. Principally, this kind of occupation, Russia demonstrated as a perfect case study of such a hybrid or cognitive warfare superiority operation. Parallel to the Russian soldiers without national insignias, therefore called the Little Green Men, they occupied the Crimean Peninsula without any larger resistance from the Ukrainian units. And President Vladimir Putin immediately issued a statement denying Russian involvement, which was widely reported within hours by the Western media. And this declaration successfully manipulated and disturbed a coherent international public opinion building, preventing the international community from interfering during the critical phase of the pseudo-referendum on the annexation of the peninsula. Following the years of this annexation, Russia primarily its troll factories, but also used Russian public media outlets to spread a false strategic narrative of oppression of the Russian people in the Ukraine. And this fake was intended to give the international community the false impression that Ukraine itself was to blame for the war. For this purpose, Russian media outlets created and published fake news about, for example, Ukraine's massacre of pro-Russian residents in Odessa. And immediately afterwards, US media cover up of the Odessa massacre. And as planned, this fake news fell on fertile ground, especially on the home turf within Russia. In our times, principally that means the Russians are conducting an ever more intense cyber and information war, including the electromagnetic spectrum, the systematic distribution of psychologically and ideologically grounded material with provocative character and a mixture of partly truthful and partly false information, accompanied by attacks, for example, on the critical infrastructure, can create a mass psychosis to despair, mood of doom, and undermine the confidence, of course, of those attacked in their government and armed forces. And from my point of view, that measures serve a really nihilistic ideology of poor power. But it was also the start of reactions from NATO and from the European Union. May I introduce my center really shortly? We have been inaugurated in 2017 according to the joint framework on countering hybrid threats between the European Union and the NATO. Currently, we have 35 member states, so we have all NATO and all European Union member states on board, plus the NATO and plus the European Union. We are around 50 people here in Helsinki working on that matter, but we have a network of approximately 800 people. They are working for us in Europe and in Northern America. What is the interesting? We are until now, the first and only European Union and NATO entity. So if we speak about hybrid threats, I give you now an example from my point of view where it started. Yeah, what are hybrid threats? Yeah, first of all, hybrid threats are coordinated and synchronized actions. They are targeting systemic vulnerabilities with a wide range of means, like cyber attacks, like terrorism, like misinfo, like deepfakes, like economic pressure, etc., etc. And these means together exploit the threshold of detection, and this is also important, attribution, and also exploit the borders between war and peace, internal and external security, public, private, etc. The goal is to advance strategic objectives by influencing the decision-making, but also the society, and undermining and hurting the target. Cyberspace and cyber as it is the main enabler for hybrid threats. Without cyberspace, no hybrid threats. If we speak now about possibilities for countering hybrid threats, first of all, I want to mention the whole of society and state approach. Not whole of government approach. We were speaking 5, 8, 10 years ago, we were speaking of developing a whole of government approach, but that's not enough. We need, for tackling these kind of threats, we need a whole of society approach. The underlying question is whether the existing cyber crisis coordination mechanisms within our states, our democratic states, if they can contribute to a hybrid crisis coordination mechanism on this kind of whole of state, whole of society approach. And what are the needs from the private sector to the public? I also can give you an answer because we were already searching for that. The European Union and the NATO, they have established a very good basis for countering cyber threats and also already for hybrid threats, but it's still not enough. Situational awareness and effective communications are the challenge. Cyber as it is inherent in all domains, but the cyber domain is as important to protect as all the other domains. Yeah, the military domains, land, sea, air, and airspace, etc. But it's a little bit more different because the cyberspace is man-made. Cyber has become part of the collective security as it. Therefore, the national cyber crisis mechanisms, management mechanisms of our European states or Northern America could be used also against hybrid threats, but that needs this kind of comprehensive whole of state society cooperation or approach. If we start to speak also about responding to hybrid threats, what are the response? Yeah, stability through resilience and deterrence, also deterrence. For that, we need 3 kinds of approaches. Like I spoke before, this comprehensive all of society approach, but also we need an international approach and we need our democratic approach because that keeps us flexible. We must look for situational awareness in our states, capabilities building. We must adopt our legislation. We must use our communication within our countries to get to our people that they know what is going on, to raise awareness, and we must be prepared. I already come to my conclusions. I give you an example. I spoke a little bit about hybrid threats. We should think about that all our states, we have vulnerabilities and weak spots. And we should think about it, what are yours, what are ours, what are the weak spots and vulnerabilities within our country. For that, we need a rational and intellectually honest analysis. We must force the dialogue with our people, with our population, with our society. We must listen carefully and we must raise awareness. The cornerstones of our democracies are challenged. Elections, for example, are in a special focus, but also freedom of speech, rule of law. Again, this comprehensive all inter-institutional, all of society approach is important. We, hybrid COE, we see us here as a catalyst. There is a demand for joint actions, joint training, and beyond border cooperation, so international cooperation. And we need much more European Union, NATO, and ally cooperation. Thank you very much. This is my speech, keynote. Thank you.
Dr. Schroefl, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Amy Ertan, who is a Cyber and Hybrid Policy Officer at the NATO headquarters. Dr. Ertan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I apologize I can't be with you in person. I needed to remain in Brussels this week, but the reason for that is very pertinent to our discussion today, I feel. So I'm covering for Brussels, as most of the hybrid team NATO headquarters are currently in Helsinki, hosting the annual NATO Hybrid Symposium. So very much an event like this, national experts, representatives, industry, academia, coming together to discuss the international approach to countering hybrid threats, and NATO's in particular. So I wanted to use my intervention today to focus on three main themes. One being setting out the landscape and talking about hybrid threats in the context of strategic competition. The second being what NATO has been doing to counter the threats that have risen in part of this strategic competition, everything from resilience to international cooperation. So I hope I won't echo too much of Dr. Schroefl's presentation. And third, and very briefly, the way ahead, where I know I will echo definitely points about more to be done, no time for complacency, and greater cooperation needed. So to start first on the landscape, and of course to start first with the obvious, Russia and Ukraine. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 risked the future of transatlantic security. It did show us, on the one hand, the power, the military power and the irreplaceable nature of that. But it showed us a number of other things which are very relevant, both for hybrid and for cyber. One, noting that Russia's aggressive actions against Ukraine started a long time before 2022, as noted just now. The other being that Russian aggression was not limited to kinetic action by any means. It's been permanent friction against Ukraine and increasingly against NATO allies and like-minded partners for some time. It's been malicious activities in cyberspace. It's been disinformation, extensive disinformation campaigns. It's been economic coercion, and it's been attempts to undermine energy security, among other critical infrastructures. And of course, Ukraine isn't the only target in this context. Look at what's happening now in Finland, everything we've read recently in the media about the use of migration and weaponized migration. That isn't a new hybrid threat. It is one that is likely to happen again in the future, including in a post-armed conflict situation. So we should be assuming that as NATO and as like-minded partners, we will continue to be subject to significant, perhaps unprecedented, sustained volumes of hybrid activity. Everything from forced human migration to the disinformation and the way that that is being enabled, as mentioned, by the digital space. And so for NATO, that very much sets our grounding principle that we're operating in an environment of constant strategic competition. It's always on, cyberspace is always on, malicious activities and hybrid activities are always on, and always happening below the threshold of armed conflict. And that has been a challenge for a while, in the sense that NATO has to be able to capture and track that activity, recognizing that despite being below the level of armed conflict, little by little, this interference does interfere with democratic processes. It does undermine military operations. It does target the security of citizens. It really accumulates into a very large effect. So despite the fact that NATO has said and allies have agreed that hybrid attacks against allies could be the threshold for invoking Article 5, NATO's Collective Defense Treaty, that a cyber attack or cumulative effect of cyber attacks could also be the basis for triggering that Article 5. We need to be focusing very much on the fact that in peacetime, below that threshold right now, we still have constant competition beyond military power and beyond hard security. That very much leads us into this space where strategic competition and hybrid activities come hand in hand. That's a bit of the NATO perspective on the landscape. So now let me talk about what we're doing when we talk about countering hybrid threats. So NATO does have a strategy for its role in countering hybrid warfare and has said and reaffirmed on multiple occasions in the last over 5 years that they will stand to defend the alliance and allies against any threat, whether that's conventional or hybrid. NATO adopted the first NATO hybrid strategy in 2015 after Russia's invasion of Crimea, and it's continued to evolve. One of the main ways in which this has happened in practical terms is the 2018 establishment of counter-hybrid support teams. So the experts in these teams are able to provide tailored, targeted advice to allies upon request to prepare against and respond to hybrid activities. And it's proved an efficient tool so far. It has been deployed to assist allies. More recently, in Madrid in 2022, NATO allies endorsed the first comprehensive preventative and response options to counter hybrid threats. Now, the point of these response options is that they can be tailored to specific situations, understanding that the malicious hybrid activities do not occur in a vacuum. There's always a context. We have different actors and different strategic competitors that are tailoring their hybrid activities, both based on their own strengths, but also based on our perceived witnesses. We see, for example, that Russia is using hybrid techniques, including but not limited to cyber and political interference, the economic coercion I mentioned, subversion, and also coercive military posture and rhetoric. Distinctly, we can see China using malicious cyber and hybrid operations and becoming an increasingly active hybrid actor in terms of rhetoric, in terms of disinformation that can be viewed as harmful to allied security. Particular aspects with China relate to their technological strengths and advances when it comes to emerging and disruptive technologies, and how we should be considering this in the context of strategic competition when we talk about our strategic supply chains, our critical infrastructure, and how we adapt to rapid technological change. So from the NATO point of view then, it's very much recognizing the threat, recognizing the advances that different actors are making, both their intentions and their capabilities, and making the assumption that the strategic competitors that we have are likely to attempt to create strategic dependencies, whether that's economic, whether that's in terms of industrial sectors and emerging technology, and that holds risks for allies and like-minded partners. If we talk about data or telecommunications, data cables, we have to talk about foreign direct investment, supply chain security, the risks of espionage or digital infrastructure that we have that we do not truly have control over. So it's very much about broadening the conversation, not only recognizing and keeping track of the risks, everything that is happening below the threshold of armed conflict, but ensure that we're proactively preparing ourselves to be able to face it. And that brings me to the last part of my intervention, which is the way ahead and how NATO can be used as a platform to defend our values, to defend our security in this era of strategic competition. So that's hybrid, it's including cyber, but it really is this broader strategic conversation. It's recognizing how we can tailor our responses as a defensive alliance to nonetheless get ahead of our strategic competitors. And a core part of this needs to be on resilience. It needs to be a long-term commitment to resilience, made not just by NATO allies, but in cooperation with other partners. Article 3 is relevant here. So Article 3 of the Washington Treaty very much talks on the national responsibility to defend oneself against armed attack. So for allies, that's about strengthening the defenses of your infrastructure, whether that's digital or physical. It enshrines a commitment of allies to both maintain and develop their individual capacities. And there has been progress in this area in terms of concrete updates to policy. So at the Vilnius summit in July this year, allies reaffirmed their support to NATO's cyber defense pledge, which very much encourages strongly allies to prioritize the cyber defenses of their national networks and infrastructure. It meant introducing ambitious national goals and minimum requirements for national cyber resilience. This kind of activity means we can start tracking progress over time and really not lose the momentum and not become complacent, because the risk of that, coming back to this environment in which we are constantly seeing malicious activity, is the cliche that the best defense is a strong defense. And if you do not invest now, we risk being distracted by constantly firefighting and recovering from malicious attacks rather than getting ahead of that game. So resilience is very much a step in the right direction, and it must be forward-looking too. It must be based not only on our own capacities and resource allocation, but what our strategic competitors are doing. That includes also innovation and being proactive to ensure that we do not have strategic dependencies that are outside of our control. So at NATO, we have two particular initiatives that I'll mention briefly. One being the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, or DIANA, and the NATO Innovation Fund, or NIF. Both of those are around investing in digital ecosystems, helping develop startups that can then use dual-use tech for the benefits of the alliance and for allied security. With this emerging innovation, we also need to talk about resilience and our technological backbone, including that conversation around foreign direct investment screening, potential restrictions on critical infrastructure providers and untrusted vendors. In essence, talking about de-risking on security. These are all the kinds of topics that are beginning to bubble up and take place and become more concrete in the NATO environment. And very much, I think, things we will read about in the near future at a high level as we come out of the hybrid symposium. I'll finish off, I know I'm at time, so I'll finish very briefly just talking about the need to cooperate beyond the alliance. NATO can't counter hybrid activity alone. It requires working with other nations, the European Union, of course, and we are doing so already through structured dialogues, both on hybrid and cyber defense, through Ukraine, through partners in the Indo-Pacific, other nations, and of course, recognizing the crucial role of industry and academia. Let me finish up for now, but welcome any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your input. I have a question, if you don't mind. You said that Article 5 of the NATO can be triggered by cyber threats. Can you give an example? Because we know that it's very difficult to do that in a real threat. Like if Russia invaded Poland, okay, we can, Article 5 can be triggered, but how can it be triggered by cyber threats?
So there's two parts to the ways in which cyber might be provide the basis for invoking Article 5. One is if there was an individual incident, and NATO will never speculate on what that incident should be, because we found that it could give the wrong message to adversaries, who in essence may use testing against that threshold. But the second part is that in 2021, NATO leaders agreed that a cumulative impact from cyber attacks. So in essence, a cyber campaign, not just one incident, but many, may provide the basis for triggering Article 5. And the message of this cumulative effect, incorporating that into the conversation, is to say, looking at the landscape around us and the sheer amount of sub-threshold activity that we're seeing, we're watching adversaries, and we can use a campaign of attacks. Therefore, we're discouraging the testing of adversaries where they were trying to find that threshold in the past. And also recognizing whenever we do talk about invoking Article 5, it is always a political decision. It always happens at the North Atlantic Council on a case-by-case basis. So it's not really possible for me to give you a clear-cut example ever, because it will always happen in context. It will always be a political decision, much like for other hybrid scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next guest speaker is Mr. Shis, a commander of the US Navy. He's head of the strategy branch in the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. Mr. Shis, please, let's start.
Hello. I'd like to start out by thanking you, our gracious host, for having us here and for me to be able to give my opinions on these very important matters, and also to my esteemed panelists who've given us a lot to think about so far already. So as mentioned earlier today, I am an active duty US military officer. Everything I say here is only my personal opinion and should certainly not be construed as any kind of American governmental policy, no matter what my current position may be. So that being said, I'd like to go straight into our topic of hybrid warfare. Hybrid warfare, of course, has been around in some form or another for quite a while. Unfortunately, in recent time, due to technological advancements, its potency and its ability to affect our national consciousness, our national will, and our ability and our resolve to accomplish great things and to protect ourselves has come to a new magnitude which we have previously not seen before. In part because of my background and because of my focus on cyber, my view and my talk here will be more focused on what I hold to be the nuts and bolts and technical aspects of how an effective approach and response to hybrid warfare should be. I'd like to start off by saying, of course, that the nature of free societies makes approaching and counteracting hybrid warfare to be very, very difficult, as it goes against the core of our national identities and our societal identities and Western civilization at large, or I should say free civilizations at large, which are no longer contained to the West. I like to divide our ability, the categories for which we respond to these things in two different categories, an art and a science. The science aspect is certainly something I'm more comfortable with and involves certain concrete moves and approaches to handling hybrid warfare. As mentioned by two of my esteemed predecessors on this board, the cyber domain has amplified the effects of hybrid warfare within our societies. We've talked about the need for whole society approaches, societal resilience, and for partnerships between nations and organizations. I'd certainly like to add on to that it will also require the wholehearted participation and buy-in from private industry. Again, as an active duty military officer, I've spent much of my time in operational assignments. This is an area which I'm not terribly comfortable speaking of, but which I do feel needs to be brought up. There is a tendency in private industry in the West to be focused on the short-term and immediate profits. I think it will take leadership, political will, and clear direction from governments and society at large who have all these organizations truly understand and buy into the fact that they need to be part and parcel and a strong partner in the response to hybrid threats. Of course, we can't necessarily compel private industry or any private player to do things in a private society, but what you can do at a societal level is to provide incentives. There are political ways you can do that, which are, again, perhaps out of my arena to talk about, and more societal ones where there is a buy-in from the people and a common held belief that must be advocated for by political leaders that hybrid warfare, hybrid threats are not an acceptable way of doing things, and the level of societal engagement and buy-in must be there where people can recognize and respond appropriately without the need for heavy-handed government action. I think it also goes without saying that any kind of overly heavy-handed government action to counteract a hybrid threat can amplify the effect of any kind of hybrid action in and of itself and be counterproductive to a large degree, especially given some of the political undercurrents that we've seen around here today. Going back to the theme of a scientific, or I would say more mechanical, more well-defined approach to hybrid warfare, there should be well-trodden, well-defined procedures, well-understood levels of authority and freedom to maneuver for direct responders when such a threat is recognized, so that we are not subject to slow grinding bureaucracies that will hinder our ability to effectively respond. Without getting too specific, within the Western Pacific, there have been many nations that have been subject to hybrid warfare campaigns. And one of the most, I would say, almost amusing or most effective means of counteracting were quick, government-generated, but outside of the normal bureaucracy responses to hybrid misinformation campaigns. Political leaders were willing to pay somewhat of a political price, post self-deprecating responses, memes, and be humorous. And that achieved a level of effectiveness in response that no government-sponsored Twitter or X campaign or news media press conference could ever achieve. Any kind of response will be hard. Again, hybrid campaigns go against the core of the nature of our free societies. There will be a political price, there will be a political risk, and that is something that must be recognized and must be bought into. And unfortunately, it is not something, again, that I'm terribly comfortable talking about, but it must be said. And so that is a bit of that's going to a bit of the art of the response, but going back to the science of it, once a hybrid campaign or a hybrid action has been recognized, the response must be swift, it must be unequivocal, and there must be a backing of the whole society for what must be done for this. Should there not be, because we have seen that hybrid threats are ongoing and evolving, when the next campaign comes, when the next bad actor starts to buy into this, you will see a hesitancy from those who are charged with protecting or against hybrid threats, and a doubt that they will be able to continue to do their threat if they find themselves having been constrained in the past by a lack of political will or a lack of societal buy-in to their actions that are required to protect a society. Again, this is a difficult conversation, perhaps not comfortable for those of us who wear uniforms to talk about, but it's something that must be recognized. The ability of a government to respond not only includes the ability to go head-to-head with a hybrid warfare campaign, but also to respond via technical means. I don't necessarily mean a cyber campaign per se, but I do certainly mean that being able to restrict or counteract certain means of access. A lot of hybrid campaigns that we've seen out here in, over in North America, I'm no longer there right now, have used native platforms generated in the West with false personas, false actors, which all are very clearly illegal or at the very least against the terms of service of the platforms they're on to begin with. Swift action, quick recognition, and government backing and political and oversight must be brought to bear on these things to quickly nip these kind of campaigns in the bud. Should you wait too long, as we've seen in the past, misinformation hybrid campaigns can generate a self-reinforcing effect and snowball into something that is beyond anybody's ability to affect or control. And quite frankly, achieve results that probably surprise achieve results that surprise those that have started those campaigns to begin with. We have also heard about the need for societal resilience, which is something that's been brought up by one of my predecessors here. Societal resilience refers to the fact that hybrid warfare, as we've seen, is an ongoing effort and will likely be an ongoing feature or bug of human societies from now until we achieve some level of information, knowledge sharing that is incomprehensible to us right now. We must have buy-in for people into our society, the recognition and the honesty to look at ourselves and say, we do have faults as a society, but it is something that we can work on and deal with, but that these threats or propagandas that we're seeing are not constructive, not helpful, and are quite frankly harmful to the society at large, and are not a good solution to what we do, a good solution to our problems at large. And that is part and parcel of what I'm trying to say. Again, this is a long-standing problem that's going to be with us from now until some unforeseeable point in the future. It requires ongoing commitment from all aspects of society and a total buy-in that will require political will, political leadership, and a great deal of risk to effectively counteract. No matter what people like me who are in the technical digital trenches, so to speak, that are trying to counteract these things on a cyber level, looking for false actors or compromised information systems, this is not something that can be won there. It requires a comprehensive strategy for the whole of society. And with that, thank you for letting me speak.
Mr. Shis, thank you so much for your input and for bringing your knowledge and your personal touch in the conversation. Our next speaker is Dr. Panayiotis Kikkiras, who is the head of Unit Technology and Innovation of the European Defence Agency. Dr. Kikkiras, the floor is yours.
Καλησπέρα από τις Βρυξέλλες. I would like to thank you, Βασιλική, for the floor and the Institute for the invitation. My name is Panayiotis Kikkiras, and I'm a head of technology and innovation at the European Defence Agency. In the next 10 minutes, I would like to provide you with an overview of our view on how EDA can support and enhance the collaboration against hybrid warfare. For those of you that you are not used to the European Defence Agency, we are an intergovernmental agency, which means that we are under the Council of the European Union, so we are not a typical European Commission agency. We were established actually during the Greek presidency of the European Council in 2004, and you can see our three main missions. We are the main intergovernmental prioritization instrument for developing jointly EU-level defense capabilities. We are the preferred cooperation forum for technology and capability development, and we are acting on behalf of the Ministers of Defense of the European Agency, of the European Union, towards different policies developed at the level of the European Commission. And we do that by having a life cycle approach. And this intro is critical so you can understand how we see hybrid warfare. So recently, we have finished a study which is related to the capability needs beyond 2040. The results of the study showed to us that in order to develop capabilities, you need to take into account megatrends. And there are clear megatrends that also are related to the topic that we are discussing today. I will zoom in on the security aspect. So following a foresight exercise and a TTX exercise, what we come up is that in 2040 and beyond, the military character of war will be totally changed. Probably our armed forces, we will have to fight in an environment where mega cities will be the norm, urbanization will be a key element, and at the same time, social engineering, misinformation, the rise in radicalization will be creating a totally different environment where our forces will have to survive and win the next war. And to this regard, a certain type of different capabilities are needed. Furthermore, the threatscape is changing, and we need to develop capabilities that are ranging from conventional, the ones that we know, an army against an army, to asymmetric, where we are having mixed forces, militia and tactical army, and hybrid warfare, where the limits of who is what are not clear, and it's not clear if we are above or close to a threshold where a tactical army needs to be deployed. And to this regard, we need to prepare our forces to be able to win in all these different types of warfare that can be, in some cases, simultaneous. Then the impact of IC, this is a game changer, especially in the area of hybrid. There is a very interesting report prepared from the Hybrid Center of Excellence, which demonstrates more information and more usages of AI in hybrid, in cyber defense, and the information warfare. And I would suggest those that they are interested to have a good look. What we see there is that artificial intelligence enabled systems will be a key element that will accelerate the impact of hybrid warfare when that happens, and will increase the impact in all domains, the physical, the cyber, and probably the operational. And we've seen a lot of that demonstrated already in Ukraine. So what we try to do is to understand hybrid warfare. The working definition that we are having at the European Defence Agency for all our activities is the one on hybrid threats, is the one that you can see on the slide. What you need to keep in mind is that hybrid threats are creating a very, very, very complex environment. Complex environment to understand, complex environment to attribute, complex environment to fight, because it can appear in many different dimensions. And what I said already, it's blurring the lines. It combines all types of warfare, and that means that you need to have a 360 understanding of the environment. The risks and the challenges already referred from my colleagues before me. The difficulty of attribution, it's clear. It was clear already in cyber. In hybrid, it's even more difficult to attribute and to identify who is behind an action. It can be a multi-domain attack. The convergence of physical, cyber, and operational domains, it's clear. And the preservation of public trust is one of the elements that we need to take into account, because at the core of these attacks, the target is the public trust in our institutions. So what we are doing at the agency, we are trying to create capabilities that are focusing on these first two pillars of the potential vulnerabilities. There is the critical infrastructure and in the information system. And I will try to give you some examples of our activities on how we are promoting collaboration in these two areas of vulnerabilities. So what do we do for hybrid at the European Defence Agency? The first thing is that we are creating knowledge. What we are trying to do is to increase the understanding and about hybrid warfare for all stakeholders in defense by developing studies, technical reports, identifying gaps and needs for countering hybrid threats, and demonstrate all this in the capability development plan, which is the main instrument agreed at the level of ministries of defense, where EU-level capabilities are defined, but also in the technology building blocks, which are the main technology elements that member states agree to collectively develop within the EDA framework. Increase awareness, we do that by creating exercises for different levels of decision makers and experts, and by developing prototypes for experimentation and training. And finally, by developing synergies. We are working together with NATO, we are working together with the High Excellence, we are working together with European Commission services, DG Home, DG Defis, DG Connect, DG JRC. So the scope of most of our activities are in optimizing these 5Ds for hybrid warfare. And by 5Ds, I mean detect, decide, deploy, and defend. And you can see there a lot of actions or activities that came mainly from our other activities, which are related with building knowledge and creating prototypes or creating exercises. So with more details in part of the building knowledge, we are very proud that recently we have managed to finalize and to publish the report that you can see on this slide, Fortifying Defense, Strengthening Critical Energy Infrastructure Against Hybrid Threats. This is a work that we've done at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and it has been developed in the framework of an activity that we are running for 6 years now, the Consultation Forum for Sustainable Energy in the Defense and Security Sector, and especially in the work group 3, Protection of Critical Energy Infrastructure. And we are very keen on continuing that because the dependency of armed forces to critical energy infrastructures that are beyond the control of the armed forces is one of the biggest elements for resilience that my colleague referred before, from NATO referred before. So this report is available. You can download it from the link that you can see on this slide. And within that, we have done an extensive analysis of the resilience issues, and we are proposing a number of recommendations in order to achieve that resilience. I would like to show you one video of one of the activities that it happened within the work strand, and I will comment on that later on. I guess you cannot hear the video?
Yes, unfortunately, we cannot hear it.
Okay, in that case, this is the scenario that we have played during the, sorry.
Just to let you know, we can see the subtitles of the video.
No, it's okay. It doesn't. What is critical is that that was the scenario that we have played during that exercise. It was last spring, and 1 week later, we've seen this scenario materializing in Ukraine with a dam falling and creating a huge problem to the energy, but also to the resilience in the forces. So the scenarios that we were building for this, we've seen them actually on the ground in Ukraine, which means that it's here. It's not fictitious scenarios. It's the scenarios that we will have to take into account. And on this slide, you can see the lessons learned from this exercise that I would like to share with you. Situational awareness, it's critical. Information sharing during the hybrid attack among all stakeholders and different stakeholders needs to be ready to implement immediately and not to think how you will share information. Procedures. We need to have unified protocols for public-private information sharing. There are a number of models that can support that. Decision-making. We identified that there are difficulties between who is responsible on some of the scenarios, and it was clear that we need better cooperation to align the resources and expectations. Strategic communication, critical for managing this kind of emergencies. Common security culture. In the exercise, we have operators from the energy sector, and their perception of communication, their perception of security was totally different from our colleagues coming from the MOD. Preparedness, pre-crisis plans and networks are essential for the quick recovery, but also the understanding the situation. And in the future, what we will do, we will continue this type of exercises and to extend it to other types of critical infrastructure. Because it was a very good source to identify the gaps and to improve the resilience. We are also developing technologies prototypes for experimentation and training, like the Claudia ecosystem, which is an activity that we are managing within EDA, and it's looking how you can connect different types of military stakeholders. But one of the elements of that is focusing on hybrid warfare, and we are having a training simulator so that armed forces can test different scenarios and feed command and control systems and vice versa. I will close my presentation with some conclusions based on the work that we have done until now. First of all is to acknowledge the importance of civil military interoperability and connectivity. And this needs to be tested. We should not only talk about interoperability and connectivity, but we should build ways to test it. We need to adopt a whole of society approach. My colleague from Helsinki already referred to that. We need to conduct vulnerability assessments to identify the instances. Armed forces are more and more dependent on civilian infrastructure. Communicate. Effective strategic communications might make the difference between a successful response or a total disaster. We need to develop a common European picture for the hybrid warfare threat. We need to maintain our credibility and comprehensive deterrence. And finally, we need to foster international collaboration and information sharing to counter hybrid threats at all levels, from operational to strategic. So thank you very much, and I will be happy to answer to any questions. At this email, you can send us your questions in case that we don't have time today.
Dr. Kikkiras, thank you so much. Your presentation was very educational. And again, I want to thank each and every one of our speakers for remotely being here. And it was a pleasure to have you all. And I hope we can see you again. In 5 minutes, we're going to have our next session. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and all the best.